Okay, so our session today, again, we're taking a look at the integration from PSA Web to QuickBooks, primarily focused on the desktop version of QuickBooks. So what we have, just to start with, I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview on the information that is integrated between the two systems. Okay. So we have the customer information, the vendor information, the employee information, and of course the job information is the key areas. And just give me 1 second here. Okay. All right, so just I've got a slide up here on the screen just showing you that the information, again, coming from the web to QuickBooks will include anything that you've got in there for customers, vendors, and of course, we will transfer over time cards if you are doing your payroll inside of QuickBooks into the system, and as well, work order. There is actual transactions that could happen from the work order screen in PSA Web that can create financial transactions for you in QuickBooks. The information coming from your QuickBooks into PSA Web will include any of the customers and vendors, employees, and of course, if you've got invoices or expenses allocated towards jobs, that information will come in and populate into the financial information in PSA, allowing you to run reports. Okay. So I'm just going to bring up a screen here with a PSA Web screen. So in PSA Web, under the Relationships menu, we have Companies. So just want to, the Relationships menu doesn't list customers and vendors separately. So if you were just setting up to create your information to sync between the two systems, behind the scenes, it identifies if it's coming from QuickBooks as a vendor or a customer. And what it does then is within the company that are here, there would be a type that would be allocated to it. So vendors would be coming from QuickBooks vendors, and the customer type is set for customers. So the requirement, of course, at any point in time and going forward in the future, if you were adding a new company and you were doing it from PSA Web, the mandatory would be either a vendor or customer type would always have to be added as a basic minimum to make sure it falls into the right spot in your QuickBooks. Okay. The other thing I will show you is under Relationships and Contacts. If we're looking here at, these are any contacts that are setting up in QuickBooks that have a type of internal will flow through to your employees inside your QuickBooks program. Okay. So I'm just going to bring over a QuickBooks screen here to show you. Okay, so here is QuickBooks Desktop. And again, if we're looking at customers, if I just pop back here and let's go back to a company. So if I want to open up the vendor ABC supplies here, and I click the edit, this information, the address fields, the contact information will flow, and we'll just open up a similar screen in our QuickBooks. So we're going to go to vendors, open up ABC supplies, click on the details here, and this information is synced over from there. Okay. I'd like to take a look now back over on the web at the jobs. Actually, so let's just do a customer first here. So let's go back to Relationships, and we'll bring up a customer of a customer called Travis Brown. So this is the customer. Okay, so we've got a name, his address, and we've got some contact information. And I want to point out as well which fields sync between the two systems as far as contact. So we're going to pop back over to our desktop, and we'll close up the vendor. And here is our list of customers. So down the left, my data already has some jobs created. So there's Travis Brown as the customer. There is a job that's already created, so it's below. But the main customer is sitting here. And this information, you can see we've got his address, phone numbers. Okay. And below we have the job information. So let's start by looking at the job in the web. Okay. And we're going to go back to the jobs. Okay, so here's our job listing in PSA Web. And we have a job here for Travis Brown. There's the job number. So just going to click the edit button here to open that job up. Okay. So you can see here we have a job number, job name, and the customer name. So again, in PSA Web, we have a different field for name than the customer. And this may be the same in a situation where we have a job for an individual person. There may be a situation where your customer may be a different company possibly that you're sending the bill to, and it's different than what you want the job name to be. So those can be identified separately. Okay, so we're going to go over to our QuickBooks screen. And we're going to open the job, and I'm going to click on the pencil just to open up the edit. So just to show you, the job name field is where the PSA Web job number will flow to. The customer that was identified is up here in the top right corner. And the company name field that's here is what is the job name. Okay, and so happens in this case it's the same. The phone numbers. For a customer, the main phone number that's here flows through and connects to the phone in PSA Web called the home phone. The alternate phone is the work phone. And we have the main email flows through to a work email as well. Actually, this main email is the personal email. And there's an alternate email as well that can set up. So let's, okay. One tip for you all, if you are not currently using QuickBooks Desktop, connected with PSA Web, but you're considering it, if you have jobs created within your QuickBooks, you may have created them with a similar structure. You may have whatever your job name that you might have been. I'm just going to go back out to the screen. So if you have created this hierarchy with your data, there is one area that I want to point out. So let's go back into that screen. There is a tab called Job Info. And if there is anything populated into this field on a job or a customer in your QuickBooks data, before we set up the synchronization to flow to PSA Web, it may cause some issues when the jobs start flowing into QuickBooks because it gets confused and thinks that there's actually a job because there's information on this screen. So we have identified that and know that you want to make sure for any customers that you're going to be creating jobs or existing ones that you want to synchronize back and forth, that you do need to remove any data off of this tab of the customer or job before it syncs to PSA. Okay, so again, we just reviewed over the fields that sync between the systems, and let's just on the line of kind of setting up customers and jobs that if you're setting up brand new, if this was our data right here and we were not hooked up to PSA Web yet and we were wanting to get connected, all of the information that you see here would flow over. And because there are jobs structured underneath as a sub-customer, then they will actually create the job for you inside of PSA Web. Okay, if your customer list right now doesn't have the sub-customers or the jobs, then we turn to sync on. The customers would all sync over, but there would be no jobs. Okay, so we do need to, if you want jobs, they can be created beforehand in your QuickBooks. The other, if we go down to another job here for this customer, you'll see that I have some transaction history. So any financials that you have that are created for your jobs in your QuickBooks will synchronize over into PSA Web for you. You want to make sure that the invoices, or if there's credit memos or payments or costs that get allocated, that all of that happens on the job itself. Okay, so you could potentially have multiple jobs, but they need to be added in for the specific job. So if I were to open up this invoice, for example, you can see in my customer up here that it's not just to Holly Hannah, but it's also set to go to the job. Okay. All right. So let's, so on that line of talking about the financials flowing over, I'm going to go back over to PSA Web for a second. Okay. So I had created this job for Travis Brown before our session, and we have it in the system. And if we, again, we just took a look at that inside of our QuickBooks here. So let's go back here. But you can see we have no financial information. So the next thing I want to cover in this session is to show you when you're wanting to put actual invoices in and put some costs in against this job, and then we're going to see how that flows over into PSA. So right now you can see we have no transactions. So we're going to do an invoice for this customer. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go up, we're on the job, we're going to just go and say we want to make a new invoice. And we're going to, so we're going to just say, no, we don't want to do this right now. Okay. And we're going to choose, this is my sample company, so I'm just going to grab something from here. How about we just say supervision? Okay. So we'll pick an item, put a quantity, add okay. We're going to put an amount into invoice. We'll put $500, and you can assign whatever tax would be applicable. And we'll hit save and close. So we've now created an invoice. Okay. So how does the invoice get from QuickBooks to PSA? So let's talk about that for a second. When we hook up and set up a connection between your QuickBooks desktop and PSA Web, there's a synchronization utility that has to be installed on your server where your QuickBooks data file resides. So I'm just going to, just one second here. I just got a slide that I can show you on that. Okay, so again, just the sync utility goes on that server. The default then would be set for every 30 minutes. It'll just run through and it'll do a synchronization both ways. Everything that's connected with the data, customers, vendors, job information that's changed, will synchronize back and forth every 30 minutes. That's one way it can be configured. Another comment is in some fairly small companies that don't have a data server, you'll have a person who has their data, their QuickBooks data on their computer that they work in. So the synchronization only takes a minute or two at the most, but when that sync is running, it does affect your QuickBooks. It pauses it. So that's not a great option for those of you that are working away in your QuickBooks for that to happen. So if that is, again, our ideal recommendation would be that that QuickBooks data file gets put onto a separate computer where you're not actually running your QuickBooks from. But if that's not how it's set up. And what we'll do is we could change it to a manual synchronization option that the person having it on their computer would start to sync when they wanted to run it. And they would realize that because they're controlling it, that it's they'll have a minute or two before that sync is finished. Okay. Again, the sync might not take too long. It just depends on the volume of data that's being transferred. Okay. All right. So the sync has. Let me just a second here. So we created an invoice. I haven't run the sync yet. There is an automatic sync that's going to run in the background, so it might happen while we're working, but I'd like to do another example for you to put a cost in for a job before I run the sync, and then I'll show it to you together. So we've just done an invoice, and so the next thing we want to do is we want to apply a cost in our QuickBooks against the Travis Brown job. So one of the setup items that we want to think about when we're going to bring costs from QuickBooks over to PSA is going to be the type of cost. So we want to maybe know if this is a material cost, or is it a subtrade cost, or is it just another general expense. So there are a couple of different types of costs that we want to be able to identify. So there's a few options that we can give you to help you achieve that information. One of them is to go into the vendor itself, who you're going to be doing the purchase from. So I'm in the PSA website, going into the companies, clear that filter, and let's say we've got ABC Building Supplies. They're obviously going to be a material supplier. So I'm going to click the edit, and you can see down on the left-hand side the default cost type. So this drop-down list that you have here allows you to choose the main sections, categories that we identify that in our reports inside of PSA. So in this case, we've set that to be material. So by doing that, before you select a cost over in your QuickBooks, then when that transaction comes over and updates into PSA, it will use that category for that expense. Okay, so that's option number one. We have this is brand new that just came out this past week, another option that allows you to use the QuickBooks class field to identify the cost type that you would like to do as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to my QuickBooks. And we're going to do a transaction. We need to get into a different screen. So let me go to the vendor center. And there's my ABC. We'll do a couple of different transactions. So there's different kinds of expenses that you can put into QuickBooks. So you'd be putting a bill in, or you might be putting a credit card charge. So if I go into my vendor and I say I want to enter a bill, this bill, again, I'm just going to put 718-1 as my reference number. Say we have $100 of materials here. And again, you allocate it just the way you would normally put in your expenses. So say I just pick this, and we purchased and then this is where you want to allocate and set up the job that you want this cost to go towards. So if I'm putting this against the Travis Brown job, I've got to make sure I pick the job number. And then without using, I mentioned just a minute ago about the class field. So if I don't use the class field in this case, this information is going to go over to PSA and it will be identified as material. So I'll just do that one this way. Okay, and actually I'll just maybe go down here, save and close. All right, the class field that I mentioned, I'm just going to do another example for you on that one. So let's say I went to Paul's Electrical Services, and let's say we're going to do a bill for him as well. And we'll just put this one. Actually, let's just, maybe not go, let's do $75 here. Okay, so we're bringing in the electrician on this job, so. Again, we're going to choose our job. This time I'm going to show you the class option. So if you're all QuickBooks users out there, the class drop-down lets you see anything that's been set up. You can add new. So if you have existing classes, that's fine. And maybe that isn't going to work for you to use this for PSA, but if you're not using it, there is a key word that you need to have. So if you have the word material in your description of your class, that's going to be enough to trigger it and say, that's material. When it hits PSA, it will identify it as a material type of a cost. Subcontractor is another one. So if I choose subcontractor here, that is going to come over and it's going to allocate that as that type of an expense inside of PSA. Okay, so I'm going to choose that and save our transaction. Okay, so I've just assigned a couple of costs for this job and I have done an invoice. So I'm going to do the sync on my other system here. Just 1 second. A lot of screens to juggle here. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're back now looking at PSA Web, and to see the information on actual costs or revenues on a job, we're going to see that. First of all, we want to make sure we have the job open. So in the top right, I can see that I have the Travis Brown job open. So I should be able to see everything applicable to that job from my jobs menu. So I'm going to go down to the financials. Okay, so on this screen, you have a couple of columns. So the actual columns are the actual information that's going to be coming in from your PSA Web. The estimate column, that information was all set up previously in a work order. And we have, again, we can see we have $100 of material that came in from our supply company. Labor was something, I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, but I had put some labor costs on here before. We had a $75 charge for our electrician. So that information came into there. Down at the bottom, we can see that any invoices that have been sent out for this customer. So you can see here that we have a total amount of $500 for that invoice that we created. Okay, so we didn't do too good on this job. We only got 11% margin. So it shows us that at the bottom of the screen from the actuals that we've got in here. The two tabs here give us the details. So if I go back to invoices, you can see here that I've got the invoice number, the amount, and the dates, everything. And again, we haven't received any monies against it. We'll do that in a second. And if we go to the cost tab, you'll have the breakdown of the two items that we posted plus the one that I did earlier. We'll do another one together in a second. So we've got your material for ABC, and this was the reference number that I had used. And we also have Paul's Electrical Service as a subtrade. Okay. Now, with regards to payroll information, if you are doing your payroll inside of your QuickBooks, we can take the timesheets over from PSA and import them in so that the result of that would be that you would have the total hours with the job number information inside your QuickBooks program. Okay. So the time card feature of PSA lets you gather, have the time tracked, have the rates that you set up within the employee information. So remember, we were on the contacts, and we had, if we were looking at, say, one of these employees, we would have the rates that are set up here are specifically for when the time cards are approved and they're finalized and called transferred. That is the rate here that the job is going, those labor hours against the job will be costed. So what we were just looking at a minute ago, if I go back, I'm going to open up this financials on a different tab here. So my second tab. So this, if I go back to costs, this labor here was for Mark Edwards for transaction that had been done. So there was, this was the description of the note he put on his time card. There was the date, and there was 6 hours of labor that were put in. So we have all of that information sitting for our time card with his hourly rate. Okay. Again, if you choose to take that information over to your QuickBooks, let me just bring up the QuickBooks screen. Whoops, hang on a second. Okay, so here, I'm just going to open up the Employee Center, and let's say we were working on Mark Edwards. So in order for information to be synced, there would need to be some options turned on that timesheets were enabled in your QuickBooks, and underneath the payroll info, the rate types here are very important. So there's a little bit of additional setup as far as making sure that if this is the description of the pay rate type, that information matches exactly in the setup inside of your PSA, and that the use time data checkmark is set here. You're only going to see this option to turn this on if you've, in your preferences of your QuickBooks, if you've turned on your timesheet data. Okay, and if I pop back over to PSA for a second, I'm just going to, again, based on those descriptions of the pay rate types within your company setup, if we go underneath the jobs, there is a section here for setting up your time cards. So you want to make sure that in here, where if you're doing overtime calculations, that you have that rate is matching the ones that you have set up for your employees, which is the same that you have inside your QuickBooks. Okay, so that's an important setup item. And if we go to the time cards themselves, okay, so here we have a time card that is in the system already for the same person, Mark Edwards, for 1 hour. The process when this transfer step, what that does inside your PSA is it finalizes the time card, it updates the job information inside of your PSA web with the labor costs for the employees that you're transferring, and it also, if you have enabled your timesheet option in your QuickBooks, it will send over all the timesheets. So again, if we go to transfer, you'll see the period. So we've got 1 day set for the 17th, and you would see all of the information for that employee here. If you had multiple employees with time, you would select them from this drop down to do the review and ensure everything was correct with the total hours for each person for each day in that period, and then you would click the transfer. Okay, so now I've just done a transfer, and if I'm going to just do the sync again one more time. And we will bring back up QuickBooks. Okay, so if we are just close out of this, guys. Okay, so for Mark Edwards, if we are looking at his timesheet, we would go up here and open up the timesheet area. And this is the first one that I did. In the second one that sync finishes running, we're going to see the other time, which was on the 17th, populate. But this information flows through here, and you would have the total amount. So when you would go in to process your next payroll, it would automatically ask you, do you want to pull in the timesheet information? And the total hours there would become the total amount that is going to be paid to that employee. Okay. There is one, oh, there it is there, it just came in. So there's that, we only did the 1 hour on the other day. So there's your total amount. Okay. All right. Let's close up there. There is one other tip that I want to, tip, but just information that to be aware of is the option inside of your QuickBooks to, let's say a job is done for a customer and you want to basically, you want to close the job maybe over inside of PSA, or you want to inactivate from your QuickBooks side. So I want to explain how that synchronizes back and forth as well. So at the moment we have a customer that's called, actually let's just pick one who's got no job. So we've got one here for Patty. So if I picked the Patty job and let's say this is all done, it's finished. If I wanted to inactivate that in my QuickBooks, you will see here, if we go make customer inactive, it is now hidden that from there. But not only was the customer, but also there was jobs underneath it. So immediately what that's going to do is the next time again that we sync, it is going to close those jobs automatically inside of PSA. Okay. So I'm going to just run the sync one more time. Okay. All right, so back here, let's go here. And if we looked for, again, that sync hasn't run yet, maybe it hasn't got that far. Okay, so we're seeing Patty is still here with, let's just double check the job number that we had there. Okay, so in QuickBooks, if you wanted to see somebody that's been inactivated, you could show it this way. So it was job 18-0010 and 008. Okay, so there's the two. So this was before it was closed on the QuickBooks side. So now just probably that. So now this isn't the one that we were just looking at. We will have to go to all, and you can see the status over here on the right, that it has closed it automatically because we inactivated it over on that side. Okay. The same thing would apply here. If you were to take a job and go into the job and say, okay, I'm finished, this job is completed. If you close the job here, it is going to inactivate that job in your QuickBooks. Okay, so it does it both ways. Okay, so that's something just to be aware of, so that you plan accordingly, knowing that that's how it's set up. Okay. All right. The other thing, the customer, if we go to companies right now and we look up Miss Patty Bork, again, that's a different customer. it's no longer in, when we're looking at our companies list, these are all active companies. So if you don't want to have anything that's inactivated from your QuickBooks showing up all the time in your company's listing here, plus for selection on other parts of the system, the inactivated customers in PSA, they're not, the term inactivated isn't used at the moment. It's actually called deleted. So if we were to hit delete on a customer, it does remove it from this list of companies, but it's still available in the background underneath your settings menu. So if we go to recover deleted, so again, usually that's set for administrators to go and pull anybody that has been inactivated and bring them back into the active state. You would come underneath your companies. There's the customer that we deleted, and we can hit recover. So if we do that now, it brings that customer back, and they're going to be back now available here. So there she is back. Okay. All right, and just check here whether. Okay, so it doesn't bring the jobs back. Okay, so it's not, didn't bring that customer back, didn't reactivate those jobs, obviously. But if there was ever a need that you had something that had been closed, you think, oh, we got to reopen that job up, you would just need to open up. This is just a separate step. You would reopen up an old, hit the edit button, and you'd use this open button in order to bring that job back to life if there were some more details that needed to be added to it. Okay. All right. So that's the kind of the list of everything that I was going to cover in this session. And I'll just check and see what we've got in our chat window, if there's any questions anyone has entered. Don't see anything. If there is, if anybody has any questions, do you want to just take a second and jot it down in the chat window? Okay, so Angela's asking, how do we get the recording? So I believe that Ryan Pritchard will be putting it into each of you that have registered for this training into your Dropbox. So it'll be entitled what our session's called. So it should be put into your Dropbox, okay? And Tiffany has asked, is this recorded? Yeah, so that answers your question as well, Tiffany. And Dan's got a question. And he's saying, for salary personnel, can the labor burden be applied to job costing? For salary personnel. So the burden that's set up is inside of each employee. So if I were to go into, say, Mark Edwards, the labor burden is down at the bottom here where it says overhead percent. So that's a calculation of this percent against the gross pay calculation for the entries. So if it's a salaried personnel, I guess I'm not really, there would be nothing to multiply it against. I'm going to just enable or unmute you, Dan. See if I can do that.
Can you hear me, Mary?
Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay, so can explain that difference. So salary personnel wouldn't have a rate of pay here, right?
So I guess to be a little more specific, you were going into like the clock-ins, how they clock into the jobs, it's applied to the job.
Right.
And the job costing. So with a salary personnel, it's just for us, like our project managers. If we have a project manager at $70,000 a year, and he's running 10 jobs at a time, from my understanding on when we were into PSA, the desktop financial version, that could be distributed among all the open jobs he is assigned to, including the labor burden that we would attach to that person. Do we have that same capability if we go switch over to QuickBooks?
I am not 100% sure on that answer, so I'm going to have to check and see how that would work. Okay. So let me just get, Dan, what, I don't just see your first name. What company are you with?
Dwyer Restoration, DWYER.
Okay. Labor burden on the desktop. Okay. I will find the answer to that question, and I will send you an email.
Okay. Thank you, Mary.
Great. And is there any other questions from anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, I hope this information today has been helpful, and I will wish you all a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you next time.